Hi, this is Sally Morgan, physical therapist, craniosacral therapist, and Tellington T-Touch practitioner for animals and people. This is Tristan, he's a Corgi, and we're here for another episode of Conversations with a Corgi. So first, we have an update on our moose who wandered into my yard maybe Sunday, and he has, I think, expired. I thought he had expired yesterday around noon, and then the wildlife guy finally came. I had an appointment at 3. When did he arrive? 2:45. So we had a quick conversation, and he had actually gone down and tried to assess him a little bit and look at him, and the moose did lift his head in a little bit of concern, but could not stand up. So he was looking a little better last night when Brian came to mow the lawn, but not improved better, just like moving a little more and a little more nervous because some kids were riding dirt bikes out in the back across the stream. And then we also had my family of a doe and 2 twin fawns, who are pretty big now, eating around where the moose was. I don't know that they saw him or had any concern for him. So I think by this morning there's no more moose living in the moose carcass. So the wildlife guy thought that the moose probably had something called brainworm, which is a parasite that eats the brain. Usually it kills a much older moose, and this guy is very young, not only maybe a year old, and he said, you know, things happen sometimes that we can't explain, and we think that that's what happened to him because he's so thin. And he said it just depends on what part of the brain the worms attack. So for this guy, obviously his mechanism to feed himself had been interrupted by this parasitic damage, and so he wasn't eating at all. He was so skinny. I mean, you just can't imagine how emaciated he really is, and I didn't even think he had his full winter coat, but in fact the wildlife biologist thought that he did have a winter coat, which means he's even thinner. So the poor moose, and I'm just hoping some people will have a good lunch on him. I've seen the crows circling around. The eagle's been passing by every once in a while. I saw a small coyote last night down where my neighbors have chickens. But I don't know that a coyote is going to come and get him. The wildlife guy was pretty skeptical about coyotes and bears, so we'll see what happens. Anyway, Tristan and I have to go to the TV channel in downtown Northampton today to do an interview about holistic physical therapy for pets and people, and we could do a little refresher on that for you guys today. I was thinking of talking about chiropractic, but I am kind of busy and don't have time to do that the justice it would need. So we'll just, my very first episode, I said some of these things, and I think today might be a nice time for new people to kind of get familiar with some of those ideas, or if you forgot them or missed them, you can at least update. So what I do, I call holistic physical therapy. And what that means is I look at the body as a whole. In traditional physical therapy, you look at parts is parts, because it comes out of traditional medicine. And for instance, often when somebody, a human in this case, but certainly for dogs too, has knee surgery, you are walking around with a compromised gait, limping, using crutches, sitting with your leg up or your leg in different positions that it's not normally in. And we frequently see back pain coming along with people who have knee problems. And in traditional physical therapy, we wouldn't address that. We'd wait until the knee was better. We had the person riding the bike, walking, doing everything they needed to do to rebuild their knee muscles. But we wouldn't address the back pain until we had another prescription from the doctor and the knee was completely better. And then we would go on and treat the back pain if the person's insurance approved it. So that to me just seemed a silly way to treat a body, because a body's a whole thing. So early on, even really before I was in PT school, I started looking at the body as a whole. It's part of my general way of an approach to life and certainly to my private practice. So I specialized in manual therapy, and I still do, and that includes craniosacral work and myofascial work, some basic lymph work, something called strain counter strain, which is a positional release technique. There's something called muscle energy that I don't use as much as some people. It's complicated. It doesn't hold for a long time. I have a lot of other more effective tools that I can use. And of course, T-Touch I use quite a bit, actually, with humans and animals. So that has been the typical parts of my craniosacral practice and my physical therapy practice. But holistic therapy really includes the idea of the body as a whole. So you don't just treat one part. I have had an experience myself where I have a pretty severe lingering injury in my left ankle. And at one point I couldn't lift my right arm at all. It just like I got a frozen shoulder, and I didn't fit any of the profile for what happens when you have a frozen shoulder. So lo and behold, I was sitting in a yoga class, which I could not do. I was just sitting with my legs crossed in front of me, propped up with 100 blankets and blocks, crying because it was hurting my ankle so much to have it that much internally rotated, to sit that way, and I could not figure out how to get it more comfortable. Well, after an hour of crying, I got up and the yoga teacher was saying, "What's going on?" And her class was for people who were in situations like mine, so I wasn't the only one having problems during the class. And she, while she was talking to me, I just reached my hand up to fix my hair and I could move my arm. I had full range of motion back in my shoulder, which informed me of the important fact that what was going on in my ankle was affecting the rest of my body. And as I got more and more range and function in my ankle, my shoulder became better and better and better, and I could use it more. And to this day, if my ankle is having a problem, my right arm is having a problem. And that's diagonal through my body to the left ankle, because the fascial pull, your fascia goes all throughout your body. I should actually do a whole Facebook Live on fascia. And it conducts electricity faster than nerve tissue. Fascia is fascinating. And the way to affect fascia is by holding it for a long time in a new position, like silly putty. If you stretch out silly putty and hold it slowly, it will stretch and retain that new shape. If you pull the silly putty fast, it'll break and you won't get that new shape. So fascia is kind of like silly putty. So in yoga, and the kind of yoga I was doing then and the kind of yoga I teach now, we hold poses for a really long time, 3 to 5 minutes, and that allows your fascia to get a new form, and then it stays with you. It's a permanent change in your body. It's really powerful work. So that really sealed the deal for me, that your body is a whole thing. Like, I could have worked on my ankle for 100 years and I would not have had a better shoulder unless I saw that connection between the ankle and the shoulder. And I could have worked on my shoulder for 100 years, and unless I fixed the ankle, my shoulder wasn't going to get better. So that was a huge eye-opener, and it came to me at a perfect time in my life when I was just beginning working as a physical therapist and really understanding the body in a new way, in actual humans as opposed to cadavers and chatting in labs at school. And, as an athlete, I was a very high-level competitive horse rider in many areas. And so that gave me a lot of information about our bodies, too. I saw with my horses, if I was having tension in one part of my body, it went all the way through the horse. And in centered riding, I saw how just squeezing your toes on one foot can throw your horse out of balance and make him walk sideways and make your saddle crooked over years. So, of course, the body is a whole unit. So part of holistic physical therapy is embracing this idea of the body as a whole unit. We're not just parts. And our medical system in this country is structured around the idea that we are just parts. And in fact, insurance reimbursement and all of that is focused on that idea of treat this part, treat that part, and we do one part at a time, because I think for their insurance billing and things, it would be really complicated to determine what thing we're working on today versus yesterday. I think our insurance situation has kind of driven and made it so that it's not going to go away, this idea of parts. And I even had a client who was going to a doctor who specialized in geriatrics, who was told that he could only talk to her today about one thing. And when you're a senior citizen, you have 5 things going on. And she was really upset because she had complications from one thing leading to the next, and different kinds of problems, and he would only treat her with one thing at a time because that's how you get your reimbursement. So this was totally not good for me. And one of my successes in traditional physical therapy settings was that I always treated the body as a whole, which of course takes more time, hard to bill, don't always get reimbursed, which was not always the best thing to do in a traditional setting. So in my private practice, I look at the body as a whole, and then I take it one step further. I look at the relationship between the mind, the body, and the spirit, because that is also part of what's going on with your health or wellness and your dysfunction or dis-ease. And that idea of something that's affecting your energy field out here being the initial insult that's going to make its way into your body and create dysfunction in your physical structure is part of holistic physical therapy and holistic medicine. So I try to, using the energetic techniques that I do to try to work through all of the layers of the physical and auric structures. And so I have a lot of tools at my disposal, and I am able to produce kind of miracle cures because I have such a wide variety of tools, and they're carefully chosen tools to address every layer of the system that I'm working with, whether it be a dog, a cat, a horse, or a person. Sometimes people ask me, how can you be good at what you do and work on so many different animals? And I'm like, listen, even a traditional veterinarian is in awe of somebody who works with zoo animals because they are really a lot of variety. But once you understand basic essentials about how a body works, all bodies have a lot of similar qualities. They all try to achieve homeostasis or balance. They all want to move. They all need nutrition and hydration. And, once you memorize all the structures and the differences in the structures and the key differences between one species and the next, then it's not that much of a step to treat a dog or a person for an ACL tear, for instance. And I think that having worked in human PT for a long time really has helped me a lot with working with animals that need physical therapy, because I know so many different exercise protocols for so many different possible problems that you can have in your body. And because I've been working with animals for really my entire life, over 50 years, I have a pretty good intuitive way of figuring out what an animal needs to do to build up the muscles to be able to recover from an injury. So that is all the things I bring to my private practice as a holistic physical therapist. And then, of course, part of looking at the body as a whole is looking at the system as a whole. And anyone who's worked with children can tell you that you can not just treat the child without working with the whole family unit. So when you are working with a little child, you might even have the mother present during a treatment session, certainly for physical therapy and craniosacral therapy and massage and lots of other things. So when I work with a dog or a cat, usually their person is part of the treatment. And that includes like educating the person about nutrition, educating the person about some behavior issues that might be going on with the animal and things they can do to address things that they are struggling with the animal. And also that can include things like working with the person as well, because people often have the same kinds of injuries as their pets. I never will forget how one lady thought it was pretty funny one day when her dog had been on Prozac, and I said, how many years? And she said, whatever it was, 9 years. And it was a long time. And she said, oh, I've been on Prozac that same amount of time. And she made that connection between herself and her pet in that moment. And of course, if you have a dog or a cat or a horse, you know when you're more anxious, your animal certainly is more anxious. So I said, you might want to look at that a little more closely. But so that's a whole nother story. But your animals are often a reflection of what's going on with you. So having the ability to treat both the person and the pet has been really helpful in my practice, because then I really can address the entire system. And certainly for horses and riders, this is a huge benefit of doing the kind of work that I do. I am able to work with the rider, the saddle fit, the equipment, the bridle, assess the shoeing, assess the farrier work, and the the padding for the saddle and the rider's position and the rider's old injuries and structural issues. And so one of the benefits that I can really offer is to horses and riders, because I can really look at a very close and deep level at all of the things going on in that system of horse and rider because of my approach being holistic. And I think that's one of the best things I can offer as a therapist, is being able to treat a horse and rider unit, because it's a very complex situation. The rider is sitting on the horse's nervous system, and in between the rider and the horse is a saddle. And that saddle can easily adapt over time to whatever asymmetries the horse or the rider is putting into it. And so just riding in circles with your instructor telling you to do different things, if you've had that saddle for 10 years of riding incorrectly in some way, and let's face it, that probably means all of us, that saddle is making it almost impossible for you to keep the new muscle memory of what you're learning in that lesson. So having someone be able to assess the whole system can be really valuable, and being able to position the saddle a little differently, further front, further back, lift it on one side or the other, work with the saddle fitter. Sadly, many people complain that their saddle fitters aren't very good and they know more than the saddle fitter. And that is a problem in a lot of areas. I mean, there used to be a ton of really good saddle fitters in my area, but I think a lot of them have retired. So looking at all of these factors, even including how the shoe is fitting the rider, can have an impact on how your horse is performing. And, you know, if somebody is competing in a really high-level equestrian sport, or even endurance riding, I mean, in particular endurance riding, or dressage or jumping, if you need your horse to be a high-level athlete, you want everything going on in that system to be at its optimal performance, so that that horse can perform at his best and not face the wear and tear on his body that will occur if the system has some flaws in it. So that's a little bit about what holistic physical therapy is for pets and people and horses. In terms of the system with a dog, if you have problems in your body, I've seen this happen quite a bit, where people have functional leg length discrepancies, i.e. they have a short leg. So they may walk a little bit limping to one side and not even be aware of it. And I have noticed, just observationally, many a dog having that same kind of problem in his hind end when he's walking with his person on a leash. I have seen that be the same side as the dog is exhibiting a patella subluxation, you know, those little dogs with the skip to my loo. And it's really fascinating, that connection, and seeing the change in the person if I'm working with the dog, or the dog if I'm working with the person, is also pretty fascinating, because it is all one system. So that's a quick look today at what holistic physical therapy is and what holistic treatment is in a general way. And we are so busy today. I've got to get a final draft of my TED Talk up. I've had a few people read it. I have some changes to make. They aren't massive, but I need to make it shorter. I have a couple of demos in it that could take a little bit of time, and I don't want to feel rushed. So I've got to tighten that up. And then we're going down to the TV station this afternoon. Tristan didn't get a bath yet, and he's pretty stinky. He might have to be on TV being stinky, because I don't know when I'm going to give him a bath. If I wash him this morning, he won't even be dry, but he might have a little dusting up, a part clean. So that's all today for Conversations with a Corgi. We'll be back tomorrow morning, and remember, on the weekends it's around 9:30 that we start, as opposed to during the week when it's earlier. And we probably will be discussing chiropractic treatment at that point. Thanks for joining us today. What do you think, Stinky Corgi? And I might want to ask you if you want to join me doing a heart hug for the moose. He's so generous to come to my house to make his crossing. And I really appreciate his beauty being in my life and being able to share that with people. So I hope he's going to have a better life next time. Thanks for joining us today. We'll see you tomorrow.